In a broken family, where the father is drowned in alcohol and violence, the mother is indifferent to everything. The two brothers grow up in solitude. The elder brother is full of anger and despair, destroying himself while the younger brother finds only peace in his brother. But when the emotions that have been suppressed for too long explode, the forbidden relationship between the two brothers begins, pushing them into a spiral of guilt and tragedy with no way out. Amid the family's decay, a dark tragedy is silently waiting. The Mercer family home is located on a small street, Willow Lane, which used to be a symbol of the family's prosperity. But now the old two-story house with peeling paint, cracked windows, and a leaning wooden fence has become a symbol of the destruction, not only of the house but also of the people living inside. The surrounding scenery is no different, stuffy, dark, and cold like the Mercer family's life. In that house, no rules or norms existed. Since the children were young, this house had been a battlefield of constant family conflicts where trust was stifled and love long forgotten. Richard Mercer, once a talented engineer, but his career was ruined by alcoholism and failure at work. Since then, he has been immersed in drunkenness, violence, and despair. Every time he comes home drunk, Richard often vents his anger on everyone with harsh words and a terrifying presence. Although he does not beat his wife and children, his presence is like a dark ghost haunting every corner of the house. He seems to have lost all hope for his own life and dragged those around him into the abyss of destruction. Karen Mercer, their mother, is no longer the cheerful woman she once was. She used to be a passionate elementary school teacher, but now she is just a shadow of endurance. Karen has lost all enthusiasm, living a boring and hopeless life under the pressure of a violent and depressed husband. She no longer cared about her children or her own life, leaving the Mercer home to fall into chaos and disintegration. Ethan Mercer, the eldest son of the family, is the embodiment of the trauma left by family life. At 18, Ethan is a tall, strong young man, but inside he is filled with anger that he cannot control. He dropped out of school at 16, not because he was incompetent, but because he felt there was nothing more worth pursuing in life. Ethan has seen his father collapse and his mother surrender. The constant arguments, the times he witnessed his father smashing things in a drunken rage, all of which have eroded his trust in people and the world around him. Ethan learned to protect himself from emotional shocks since childhood, but now he has become a person ready to explode at any insult. Although Ethan does not want to be another version of Richard, he feels a terrifying similarity to his father. Ethan hates his father, but at the same time he cannot escape the anger within himself. He found himself sliding down the same path Richard had taken, with irrational anger and a life without a way out. Lily Mercer, the youngest daughter, is only 16 years old, but she has learned early on to face life by running away from it. Unlike Ethan, who shows his anger outwardly, Lily withdraws into her own world. She lives with daydreams and colorful paintings, but the world she creates only exists on paper. In reality, Lily is a weak and lonely girl, completely isolated from the people around her. Lily loves art and wants to become a painter, but no one in her family understands or supports her dream. Ethan often sees her as the weak sister, and Richard and Karen are too preoccupied with their own pain to care about her life. When the tension in the house increases, Lily often retreats to her room, paints and imagines a different life. But the more she paints, the more she realizes that she is just trying to escape from a reality that she cannot change. The Mercer family has no common rules or values. Each person lives in their own world. No one communicates or understands the other. No one is strong enough to save the situation. And that makes the Mercer family like a time bomb, waiting for the moment to explode. The chaos of the family is the premise for the later tragedies. People live under the same roof, but are so far apart that no one understands or loves each other. From here, adversity and conflict will push the characters to the brink of destruction, where no one can keep themselves. Ethan was the first to slide down, not only because of his father's violence, but also because of the pain that was not shared, not understood. He began to fall into a spiral of violence and alcohol. Ethan no longer recognized himself. Every day he sank deeper into self-destruction, using alcohol and debauchery to escape his inner pain. Ethan's life was now just long nights in bars, drunkenness, and driving while in a state of intoxication. The wounds and bruises on his body appeared more and more after each small car accident. Ethan knew that he was losing control, but he didn't care. He was no longer afraid of anything. One night, after drinking a bottle of strong alcohol and driving home in a state of staggering, Ethan had an accident. He didn't remember anything after the collision, only waking up in the back seat of the car with scratches and aching all over his body. When Ethan got home, he found his sister Lily waiting at the door, looking at him with worried eyes. Without saying a word, Lily quietly brought Ethan into the room and tended to his wounds. In that silence, Ethan felt something new, a strange feeling, a care from a loved one that he had never felt before. Even though he was falling and self-destructing, Lily was still by his side, taking care of him. Ethan began to feel responsible for his sister, and a sense of protection arose in his heart that he had never felt before. From then on, every time Ethan came home drunk or had an accident, Lily was always there, worrying and taking care of him. While Ethan and Lily were facing the upheavals in their lives, Richard, their father, was completely devastated. After his heart attack, his health deteriorated day by day. But instead of worrying, Richard sank deeper into alcohol. Karen showed no concern for her husband's health. She just silently took care of him out of habit, without any feelings. One winter night, Richard got drunk again and collapsed on the floor from a second heart attack. This time, he could no longer stand up. Ethan and Lily discovered him too late. Richard died in the cold and indifferent eyes of his family. Karen did not shed a single tear. At the funeral, she just stood there with a cold gaze, as if her husband's death was a relief. Ethan and Lily both felt empty, but neither knew how to express their feelings about this loss. Immediately after the funeral, Karen began to change. She often brought a man home, a man Lily had never met before. The man was middle-aged, handsome and elegant, the complete opposite of Richard. Their mother made no secret of it, openly bringing her lover home. And from then on, she no longer cared about Ethan and Lily's presence. Richard's death seemed to push Karen away from her family completely. She became more free in her extramarital affairs, and every night, the laughter and familiar sounds from her room echoed throughout the house. Ethan, after his drunken nights, felt tired and offended by his mother's actions. He no longer respected her. Lily, after her father's death, became more anxious and insecure. She felt that everything in her life was going downhill without her control. On long nights when her mother was with another man, Lily could not sleep. The feeling of abandonment became more intense. In search of safety, Lily began to go to Ethan's room every night, waiting for him to return from his drunken or accident. She felt that only by her brother's side could she find a little peace and safety in the chaos of the family. Every night, Lily sat quietly on Ethan's bed, anxiously waiting for the sound of his car pulling up to the gate. When Ethan came home drunk, Lily said nothing, just took him to his room and cared for him. This became an unspoken routine between the two brothers, an unspoken bond in the storms of life. One night, Ethan came home late after drinking with his friends. Lily, as usual, was waiting in his room, wondering if he would be safe tonight. When Ethan entered the house, the two of them walked silently to their rooms, not saying anything to each other. But when they passed their mother's room, a surprising sight stunned them both. The door to their mother's room was slightly open, and from there, Ethan and Lily could clearly see Karen and her lover doing something private. The noise was loud and clear, without any cover or restraint. Everything happened right in the house they grew up in, but now the familiar feeling was replaced by disgust and shame. They both stood there for a few seconds before realizing that they shouldn't be there. Ethan turned to look at Lily, his eyes meeting hers in silence. No words needed to be said, but in that moment they both understood something deeper about each other. A strange feeling arose, not just anger or confusion, but a confused empathy, as if they had been thrust into a world that no one but themselves could understand. Lily bowed her head, her face red with shame and anger. Ethan also felt a surge of anger rising in his heart, but instead of venting his anger, he simply grabbed his sister's hand and pulled her back to his room. They didn't say anything more, but this event changed the way they looked at each other. From that moment on, the bond between the two siblings became deeper and more complex than ever, as if they shared a secret that no one else could understand. After that fateful night, Ethan and Lily began to feel a subtle change spreading in every moment between the two siblings. Neither of them spoke to each other about what they had witnessed, but that silence only made the tension between them heavier than ever. Every time their eyes accidentally met, it wasn't just the look of two simple siblings, but the complexity of emotions that they didn't dare to face. Lily still kept the habit of waiting for Ethan to come home every night. Every night she sat in his room, listening to every footstep, every sound from the gate. But now, sitting in that room, her heart no longer just aroused worry for her brother like before, but also an indescribable feeling, a silent, uncontrollable longing. One night, Ethan came home drunker than usual. The sound of his car stopping outside the house, accompanied by a loud knock on the door, signaled that he had just returned from another accident. Lily sat in the dark waiting, and when Ethan staggered into the room, her breathing suddenly became heavy. The sound from their mother's room rang out clearly. The laughter, the passionate moans of Karen and her lover seemed to tear the quiet space of the house. Those sounds repeated every night, And this time, not only did they make Lily feel disgusted, but they also made her body gradually heat up, as if there was an uncontrollable fire inside her. As for Ethan, the fatigue and alcohol had made him lose his consciousness. But a strange urge also rose in his heart. Lily sat on the bed, watching Ethan slowly walk towards her. His breath reeked of alcohol, but his eyes couldn't hide the confusion and desire burning inside. No one said anything, but the atmosphere between them became more suffocating than ever. The sounds from the next room continued to ring, and both of them seemed unable to escape the vortex of forbidden emotions. Ethan moved closer, sitting down next to Lily. His breathing became rapid, and Lily couldn't hold back anymore. Both of them were caught in a whirlwind of desire. The fragile boundaries were erased in an instant. The emotions that had been suppressed for so long now exploded, drawing them into a vortex of passion and sin. Forbidden, desperate, all blended into a huge fire that couldn't be extinguished. They couldn't resist the attraction of their own dark instincts and desires. In that moment, all boundaries of morality, love, and humanity were erased, leaving two people immersed in a complete loss of control. That night, not only was it a night of passionate passion, but also a turning point that made both of them sink deeper into the darkness with no way out. After that night, everything changed in an unpredictable way. Ethan and Lily's forbidden relationship became more and more complicated and heavy. With each night, they sank deeper into conflicting emotions. But now, that passion was no longer just a search for security. It had become something that could not be stopped. And with each moment of silence, when their eyes met, the feelings of guilt and fear gradually disappeared, giving way to desire and madness. One night, when Ethan returned home after a drunken night out, Lily was waiting in the room as usual. But this time, the noise from his mother's room rang out more clearly than ever. It was not just laughter, but also rough sounds echoing through the silent space in the dilapidated house. They both looked at each other, feeling as if every emotion was engulfing them, unable to control. Lily's body gradually heated up, not only because of Ethan's attraction, but also because of her anger towards her mother. She felt a mixture of passion and anger, emotions that had never been so strong before. Ethan stood before her, his eyes filled with darkness, loss, and emptiness that no one could fill. In the small room, the tension reached its peak when the noise from her mother's room rang out again, like a cruel reminder of the family's collapse. Lily stood up, wanting to run away from the stuffy house, but her legs seemed to be held back by the strange feeling in her body. She couldn't explain it, couldn't escape it. Lily suddenly felt a cold shiver run down her spine as Ethan suddenly moved closer, his eyes burning with an inexplicable emotion. He pulled Lily closer, his breathing rapid, and in that moment, they both knew they were entering a path of no return. As Ethan bent down, Lily clearly felt the hysteria in every breath she took. The noise from her mother's room rang out again, pushing the forbidden passion between them to a new level. They both rushed into each other, like two flames burning in the darkness. The next morning, as the first rays of sunlight crept through the window, the two woke up in a heavy silence. They couldn't face each other, couldn't face the fact that their relationship had now passed the point of no return. Lily felt her heart heavy with guilt, but at the same time couldn't deny the comfort she felt when she was with Ethan. Ethan, on the other hand, was silent, trying to find answers in his chaotic memories, but all that was left was a thick fog of alcohol and pain. They both knew that they were trapped in a dangerous game, a relationship with no way out. But how to go back? How to escape the passion that neither of them wanted to admit? The house became more silent than ever. Only the sighs of Lily and Ethan remained in the endless nights. After the dark nights of pain and guilt, Ethan and Lily grew more and more distant, not only emotionally but also mentally. Ethan continued to indulge in drinking, accidents, and self-destructive living. However, this time it was not just an escape from pain, but he was being pushed to the brink of madness. Deep down, Ethan felt tormented by guilt over his relationship with Lily, but at the same time he could not control his conflict and anger. Lily was no different. She could not escape from being immersed in pain and confusion. The relationship with Ethan, instead of being a source of comfort, now became an unbearable burden. The eyes of others, the gossip seemed to surround her every time she left the house. In her heart, she felt increasingly suffocated and isolated from the world. The tension between the two brothers was building up, like a time bomb waiting for the right moment to explode. One night, after another accident, Ethan returned home in a state of utter confusion. Alcohol was no longer enough to distract him from his fear and stress. This time, Ethan was not only drunk, but also filled with a rage that he could not control. When Ethan entered the house, Lily was waiting for him as usual, But this time she couldn't hide her anger and frustration. The pressure of taking care of Ethan, their forbidden relationship, and the isolation in the house had pushed Lily to her limit. She faced Ethan, trying to stay calm, but her eyes were filled with anger. Ethan, despite being drunk, also noticed the change in Lily's attitude. This caused the anger in his heart to explode. The two of them began to argue fiercely, neither willing to give in. Lily blamed Ethan for his self-destructive lifestyle, while Ethan countered by reminding her of their wrong relationship, which Lily couldn't stand anymore. The argument became more and more heated. Harsh words, long-suppressed emotions were pushed to the peak. Ethan, in his anger and despair, could no longer control himself. He advanced on Lily with an aggression he had never seen before. In that moment, madness took over Ethan. He pushed Lily against the wall, his eyes bloodshot with rage and loss of control. Lily, not expecting things to go this far, began to panic. She tried to break free from Ethan's grip, but his anger had exceeded its limits. He no longer realized what he was doing. Lily screamed, but her screams were drowned out by both of their gasps and panic. In his madness, Ethan accidentally pushed Lily to the floor with too much force. Her head hit the edge of the table roughly. In that moment, everything seemed to stop. Ethan stood still, staring at his sister's motionless body on the floor. A small trail of blood flowed from Lily's head, spreading across the floor. Ethan was stunned, unable to believe what he had just done. He staggered back, his hands shaking. In his mind, everything became chaotic. He tried to call Lily's name, but she no longer responded. Guilt and despair came crashing down on him like a tidal wave, drowning him in fear. After a few minutes of standing still, Ethan realized that he couldn't stay here any longer. He had to leave this place, escape the horror he had just caused. Ethan quickly packed up a few things. In a panic, he didn't know where he was going, but he knew that he had to leave this house, a house that had witnessed too many tragedies. Before leaving, Ethan glanced at Lily one last time. The image of her lying on the floor, motionless with blood flowing from her head, made him feel suffocated. But he couldn't go back, couldn't fix anything anymore. In Ethan's mind, there was only one thought: escape. He rushed out. The darkness and silence of the night seemed to weigh down on him. Ethan drove out of town, not knowing where he was going. He didn't dare think about facing what had just happened, didn't dare look back at the last moments with his sister. In his heart, there was only despair, pain, and an indescribable sense of loss. The next morning, Karen returned home after spending the night with her lover. Little did she know that a tragedy had occurred in her own home the night before. When she entered the living room, the sight before her eyes left her speechless. Lily lay motionless on the floor. The blood from her head had dried, and there was an eerie silence all around. Karen panicked, rushing to check on her daughter, but it was too late. Lily was dead. Horror gripped Karen as she realized that her daughter had been murdered in the very house she had abandoned for so long. Images of the family life that had once existed flooded back into her mind, a family now reduced to ruins. The police were called, and from the traces in the house, they quickly understood what had happened. Ethan, Lily's brother, became the prime suspect. A manhunt began, but Ethan had disappeared without a trace. News of Lily's death and Ethan's disappearance quickly spread throughout Pinebrook. The police began an investigation, and everyone believed Ethan was the culprit. Karen, in shock and grief, was speechless. She had no idea that her neglect had plunged her family into this terrible tragedy. Meanwhile, Ethan was on the run, trying to get as far away from town as possible, but his mind could not escape the images of Lily. Guilt and panic drove him deeper and deeper into madness. There was nowhere to go, no one to turn to. Ethan felt like he was drifting in the dark with no way out. After a few days of hiding, Ethan knew he couldn't run forever. He decided to return to Pinebrook to face what he had done. The guilt was eating away at him, and he knew he couldn't live with the burden any longer. One gloomy afternoon, Ethan drove back to the Mercer house where the tragedy had occurred. Karen, who was still in the house, had known Ethan would return. She no longer felt anger, only pain and despair. When Ethan entered the house, his eyes met his mother's. No words were spoken. They both knew it was over. Ethan walked up to his mother, sat down in front of her, his hands shaking. Guilt overwhelmed him, but there was nothing he could do to change the past. Finally, the police arrived and arrested Ethan. He didn't resist, just silently accepted his fate. The Mercer family was completely broken. Lily is dead. Ethan is arrested and facing prison for murder, and Karen is left alone and heartbroken. The story ends with an irreversible tragedy, where the collapse of the family leads to the most painful ending possible. This story is a testament to how, when emotions are bottled up for too long, they can explode uncontrollably, resulting in irreparable loss.